Hi y'all, this is Jenny from the Queendustry. Welcome back to another episode. Before we dive right in, I'm going to just come on here and explain a couple of things. For this episode, we have the privilege of having our guest Sarah Rosenbaum, attorney in the entertainment industry. So we're very grateful for her time. She did have to leave as we were wrapping up, but we didn't get a chance to say goodbye to her. So that explains the abrupt disappearance of Sarah. And we also did film this outside, so excuse the noise. I did try to edit it out, but it's not perfect, and so we will be moving into a studio very soon. So I'm excited about that, and hopefully the noise won't be an issue moving forward. And finally, I referenced Juice WRLD sampling Sting's song, and I couldn't think of the name. I called it Heart-Shaped Box. That was the first thing that came to mind, but the song is actually called Shape of My Heart, not Heart-Shaped Box, so I apologize for that as well. So without further ado, let's dive into episode 5 of the Queendustry.
Hey everyone, we're back. Welcome to episode number 5 of the Queendustry. And we have an exciting episode today where we get into the nitty-gritty of some important topics that are happening right now in the music industry that we've been seeing all throughout the media and, just information for artists that we believe they will benefit from.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Porsche. And today we have a special guest. She's an attorney in the music licensing and in the music streaming space. Her name is Sarah. She's with us. And we're just going to talk about a lot of topics, hot topics that's been happening. And we really hope that an artist or someone in the business can benefit from the information that we share. And so
cool. I'm going to give my lawyerly disclosure.
Okay, go ahead.
This isn't legal advice.
It's not legal advice.
I just got pulled out of doing billable hours in the house to come out here, and I don't even know what we're talking about quite yet, but I'm sure I can give you all at least some perspective into the business.
So we appreciate you being here. Thank you.
We really do.
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Well, okay. So let's get into it. So basically today we just want to talk a little bit about music licensing, copyright, and how all that works. So I guess first of all, we're talking about, there's been a lawsuit recently, right?
There's always a lawsuit.
Well, there's always one. But
in the media, the one that people really, well, it's not necessarily a lawsuit now, but what's been happening is that there's been a lot of talk about Beyonce's new album, Renaissance, and her use of samples in it, and the artist who originally recorded those samples being really mad at her for using it and not getting permission from the original artist. And there's been a whole back and forth. The entire public has been, commenting on it, who's wrong. And, I love Beyonce. I also love Kelis. At the same time, there's also a business part that people are not taking into consideration. So we can probably talk a little bit about that. And so basically...
So I guess let's break down this, the idea of using samples, right?
Yeah.
Because that's such a big part of hip hop especially, but a lot of music, right? Because it's kind of like you're building on other people's repertoire, and that should be... It should be celebrated, but at the same time, how do we do it fairly? And what's the
what is the best approach
mm-hmm.
to go about it?
Well, so I don't know about best approach, but I mean at a foundational level, I would say that so I guess let's back up. We're talking about a sample, which means we're taking a sound recording snippet from somebody else's song and incorporating it into a new song. Assuming for the moment that you're actually sampling the actual recording of that artist and not just, re-recording the composition they used and then sampling that and interweaving it into your song, you're going to have to consider two different copyrights, both in the sound recording, of the sampled, sound recording, as well as the underlying musical composition, which, people often refer to as publisher's rights. So in this case, whether the artist, has a legitimate claim that, permission should have been sought from them for the use of this sample would really depend on what ownership rights they have in either that sound recording or the underlying composition. In the vast majority of cases, sound recordings are owned on a work-for-hire basis by the record label. So to sample that sound recording, they really wouldn't need the artist's permission. They would go to the label that paid for and owns that recording to seek their permission.
May I pause for a second? So she basically just said Beyonce did not have to ask Khalees for permission. She had to ask the person who owned it,
Right.
which would be the label or whoever owned that actual sound recording. And in this case, it wouldn't have been Khalees.
So do we know who, did she bypass the owner or does she actually get the rights from the owner?
Listen, I don't know her business or her, but from what I do know, Pharrell owned that sample.
Yeah. I mean,
So-
there's a second part to that, though, which is the underlying publishing rights, and the composition that was sampled. They would need a synchronization license in order to use that. And it depends, in that case, who owns the publishing on that song. And if it's that artist has some publishing entitlement, and if they've assigned their rights to a publisher who has permission to license, which maybe, Beyonce's team came and licensed from that publisher, because she had given permission to do licensing on her behalf with her publishing. And I don't even know if she has an interest in the underlying composition. But, typically there are agents that are doing these kind of agreements. That being said, this is like a relationship-based business, and like sometimes like it, it depends. There may have been confidentiality issues that they didn't want to say that they were releasing this song or this sample, but like to the extent there's not, maybe there's space to give like an artist notice that you're going to use their song, to avoid these kind of relationship snafus.
So you guys said a lot of good stuff, so I'm just gonna pause and break it down. So I think we should definitely talk about the difference between the publishing and the master, right? The sound recording versus, and then...
Although we're not using that word anymore.
Okay. Oh, we're not? What is the new word?
Well, a lot of the corporate entities are not using the word master recording anymore
Okay.
because it has a slavery reference, and it's not really, it's not necessary to use that word to describe that piece
So what would be the new word?
A lot of the studios are now using the word a sound recording of a musical work, or a musical sound recording. So you're basically indicating it's a sound recording and that it has an underlying composition in it. Those are the key things. But so they're changing their lingo.
So
Which
just
is good.
Yeah, because definitely those, I guess the contracts can equate to almost like
Slavery?
Yes. There's so many things I want to talk about here. Okay, so so we want to talk about publishing and then the other thing you talked about relationships, which I think we should definitely get to. But I do want to talk about, because you mentioned that with these big artists, they have agents usually helping them do that, and they rely on them to make sure all their ducks are in a row. But for independent artists, how would you go about, let's say you, well, I guess two, versus sampling versus if you, what is the word? Interpolate, when you replay it? Because that's also come up, for example, Juice WRLD and Sting, where they replayed it and then they got in trouble. So how do you license that? For my own interest too, I want to know, because I have a couple songs where I replay, and I don't know how as an independent artist to go about getting permission.
Well, so that's one area where, you're probably going to need to go back. Well, so it depends on what the use case is and how you would be wanting to use it. Is it in an audio only format? Is it audio visual? That could be a whole conversation about how to get into licensing, but you would need to get, if it was a sample truly of the recording, you need to talk to the label or labels that own the rights in the recording. And then you would also need to find, make sure you're licensing with the relevant publishers.
So what if you just replayed it? Would you only have to license with publishing? And how do you reach out? You just, hey,
if you only
artist.
replayed, if you re-recorded the composition and then you weren't using the sound recording from the record label, then you would only need the publishing rights. But the way that you would get those rights would really depend on the use cases, because even though we have one copyright system that's kind of overarching across, music, different licensing systems and structures have grown around each different types of uses. So like if you're talking about streaming versus radio and broadcast versus like background, foreground music in the lobby of hotel, like they all have unique licensing structures. And so,
you're saying you would have to obtain a separate license for each. Like, let's like take the example of Juice WRLD, right? Where that I still see a shadow. Like he replayed the da 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 from Sting song, right? Heart Shaped Box. I'm not a huge Sting. I like Sting good enough, but I don't know. Anyway, it was from a Sting song, and they didn't obtain the rights, and the song blew up, right? And then they say, we replayed it. It's not the same, but it sounds the same. So then they have to retroactively go and license it, right? Which ends up being more expensive. But how would they have approached it if they wanted to do it the right way from the get-go? How should they have licensed that? You're saying they would have to do it separately for radio streaming. They can't just
those entities tend to have so it's probably more than we can cover in this.
Okay.
But I think it would depend, like, first of all, if it's like an audio only use, like there's a statutory license where you can get certain, reproduction rights statutorily without having to go directly to the publisher.
Is that like the Harry Fox agency?
So the predominant players in that space used to be Harry Fox Agency and Music Reports. And I mean, they still are, but for the statutory license, there was a change to the law in the Music Modernization Act, which created a blanket license. And so for those audio only uses, there are ways to get a statutory license that would cover certain publishing rights if you're making a cover of the song, and you're not actually using the original recording. So that way you skip going to the label and you're just getting. But then for audio visual uses, it's a bit more complicated because in that case, you can't license it statutorily. You have to go directly to a publisher.
So if you made a music video.
Permission. So you would need a permission to synchronize their composition with your audio-visual product. And those are individually negotiated licenses to do that.
It's very complex.
Yeah, no wonder a lot of artists don't.
They don't understand because there's so many layers to the music industry and there's so many layers to licensing. And I think right now what people are trying to understand more is streaming on, the popular tools that we use now, like YouTube, Spotify. Those are the channels. Apple, those are the channels where we're hearing new artists. And so in that sense, like, how do are artists now how do they get paid on streaming?
Exactly.
Using streaming and just in that bubble.
Well, and what do you mean by an artist, though? Do you mean an artist that's performing, like the singer on the song, or do you mean like the songwriters who are writing the lyrics and the notes to the song? Because those are different systems and payees and licensors.
So I would say for now, the artists, because the artists would also include the songwriters. So how is the artist getting paid, and how will the songwriters get paid? Because right now songwriters really are trying to figure out how to get a fair share in royalties, and it's been like a war because a lot of them, even the ones that are signed to major publishers like Cobalt, they have to get like second and third jobs to make ends meet. So how can they monetize, their work without having to get a second job at Sprouts?
That's a very loaded question, Portia.
I know.
She basically set this up like, songwriters are poor. How do you fix this?
They are poor.
I'm like, wait a minute. What's the legal question in there? I'm like, hold on.
Songwriters are poor. Not all songwriters, but a vast majority of them are poor, and they should not have to be because songwriters really make the song. Melody is one thing.
Let me come back at that. The reason that there are so many poor songwriters right now is because we have more songwriters who are able to distribute music to the public than ever before. So we've basically created what I'm going to call, and this is not a derogatory term, but like a lower class that didn't exist before. because you had in the physical distribution world certain gatekeepers that like would keep people from getting into the game. You know, people weren't distributing music from home or using aggregators like CD Baby or Song Trust or whatever, you know, like, so, you know, in that world, you had a much smaller volume of music being released out into the ecosystem and a smaller number of songwriters that like would get to be involved in those bigger songs that were actually like catching traction and labels were willing to pay to put them on shelves, you know. Now you have a completely different world where the floodgates have come down and people can be creators in their bedrooms at night and post things to the internet, and it's like those gatekeepers aren't necessarily there. But then I think that raises an expectation that like everyone who participates in that world now like somehow is entitled to a certain level of compensation. And I think that's where we, you know, have problems because like, you know, the artists before that were making a living off of, you know, songwriting were getting placed on a consistent basis with major recording artists and labels. And, you know, it's kind of like, and it is like sports in a way. If you look at like professional sports, like there's like people that play, you might get to college, you might even get to professional, but there's like this very small tier of people that really get to make a living off of like a particular art form. And that's just like the nature of the curve because people tend to listen to a very small amount of the music that's actually available out there. I was telling Portia the other day that if you look at some of the statistics, like a streaming service, for example, they allow everyone to put their digital goods on the shelf these days. You know, it's not a consignment system like the old days where you had to prove that you could sell records to get a space on a shelf in a physical store. Like now there's unlimited digital shelves and they're full of things, but like on average, like, you know, maybe about 80% of that music never gets a single play. Oh, wow. And so, and then even within that remaining 20%, you know, the vast majority of the plays are just a few hundred tracks like out each month getting this, you know, so it's a very disproportionate amount of usage from the end users and the consumers. So part of this is like, are you getting placements on, you know, major hit records, or are the artists that you're working with able to have the marketing budget to cut through the chaos and get like enough plays on their songs to get paid? So I don't know. I guess I challenge the notion that people are entitled to a certain level of compensation, you know?
You know, I like your perspective because I've never heard that before put that way, because it almost puts a positive spin on it in the sense that instead of thinking of the trend towards streaming as you actually said that there's more people who have opportunity. But you have to prove yourself, but there's more entryways. Yeah. You just still have to work your way up, but it puts a positive spin because rather than thinking like, oh, it's diminishing, it's actually opened a whole new market. Like you said lower class, but I know you didn't mean direct, like another group, right? And then maybe they just need to work a little harder, or maybe some of them won't make it, but it's giving more people the chance. Yeah. Which I like that because it makes it feel a little more positive and open-ended. But also, how do we push through? Because this is sort of a growth period, I feel like. It's not going to stay in this. I feel like streaming is going to morph somehow.
Well, yeah, streaming, I'd say, is going from its, like, adolescent stage into, like, its early adulthood, you know, like, where, you know, you're seeing still different use cases, but there's definitely, like, mature, like, licensing structures around it. People tend to know what the rates are now. It's not the Wild West that it used to be.
So what do you foresee for so if 80% of the music on streaming is not getting a single play, that can't be sustainable, right? Like, it's just gonna, even if you say there's unlimited digital space, I mean, it still takes physical, I don't know what those are called, like computers to store all that. So eventually it's going to get expensive to store 80% of unplayed music. There's got to be something that kind of,
you know, to be honest, like the real cost in that like portion of music is not like the cost to store it on servers, but it's like the litigation costs that come with like, you know, having poor like ownership data and not being able to properly license. And that was kind of the inflection point that like the streaming services were at a few years ago before the Music Modernization Act was passed, because you had all this like, you know, they called it the democratization of the record store. Some people are like annoyed with that term. But, you know, that like we call it long tail content, that stuff that's getting very little plays or no plays, like it was there and it wasn't generating revenue for the services because people weren't actually listening to it and like as part of their subscriptions.
So it's expensive on both ends then.
Yeah,
it's not
but
really
then
helpful for anyone.
it generated the most litigation because like those songs had the worst like metadata associated with them because like major labels and publishers like tend to produce better metadata because they have the resources and staff and they're like curating their data because they want to get paid, you know, like but like the long tail stuff, people may not understand that like putting that data in is how you monetize your music once it gets out there. And so like there was a lot of risk associated with it because if you didn't have the metadata, you didn't know how to send like these notices to publishers to get their music license. And then you end up like being in a situation where there's infringement liability. And so that's part of what the Music Modernization Act did was like create a blanket license so that like the services wouldn't have like statutory damages under copyright law, like while we figure out the data problem and like clean up the data. So, you know, that was kind of the situation there. But anyway, the point was if we hadn't passed like that law to put a blanket license in place, I think a lot of the services may have had to start making decisions about taking that kind of indie and long tail content down because like I said, it's not generating revenue and it's costing them in litigation. Like, you know, was it worth it to keep it up? And now it gets to stay up.
What is the blanket license? Can you explain a little more on that? So how does that work, I guess?
Sure. There's kind of like three, I'd say, types of like structures for licensing in this country under copyright law. One of them is direct licensing, where you just go to an individual publisher and you do a deal as a service, like I need these rights, and you go directly to that one entity. Then there's, we call that voluntary licensing.
Would that be like the distro kids and CD babies?
So that's actually tier 2. We're about to get to that bucket. So that one is voluntary, meaning it's not like there's not a statutory license where the law says like a publisher has to give their rights for something. Like it's a negotiated deal.
It's like if Spotify came directly to Porsche and said, I want to put your music.
Yeah, and which they do with the major labels and the major publishers. They expect them to come directly for deals and not rely on like, you know, statutory licenses for certain uses or, you know, well, that's changing with MMA. But then there's collective voluntary licensing is what I call it, meaning that's your ASCAP and BMI or Sound Exchange, and these are all different rights that these organizations represent. Well, actually, so Sound Exchange, that goes in the next bucket, that's statutory, but in the middle, like ASCAP and BMI, you know, publishers voluntarily sign up with them and say, manage my rights. Yeah, CSAC, GMR, those are the 4 USPROs. You know, so that's like they license on a collective basis, or on the sound recording side, that kind of aggregation would be your CD baby or your whatever, you know, that's aggregating sound recording rights and licensing them. And it's voluntary though. You sign up and say, please, you know, license my sound recording, license my work, you know, but it's done on an aggregate basis. Then you have statutory licensing, which is like a creature of the law. And it means like the rights owner doesn't have a choice as long as like the user of the music follows certain rules that are in the law about how to report and pay to them, and they pay the rates that are mandated, then they have a license for that activity. And so much of what the Music Modernization Act was about was that third category of creating a blanket license for the statutory license. So it always existed, but it was licensed on a publisher by publisher basis, where you had to send a notice to each individual publisher saying, I want to use your works under the statutory license. But that was where we ran into problems because the data wasn't there. It's showing us who owns what, how do we get in touch with them to license. And so MMA, or the Music Modernization Act, created a blanket license that covered all works out for certain uses. This is for audio-only uses in the U.S. for reproduction rights. And it created a new organization called the Mechanical Licensing Collective, where you would want to, as a publisher, register your works so that you can get royalties for the reproduction licenses used for streaming, for audio-only streaming. So if you haven't heard of the Mechanical Licensing Collective, it's the MLC.com. I would definitely go check out their website. And if you haven't already, register with them. This is different than ASCAP and BMI, just to put that out there. On the publishing side, there's 2 different rights that you would need for streaming, which is a public performance right, which is licensed through, you know, ASCAP, BMI, CSAC, and GMR. And then you need a mechanical reproduction license, which, like I said, used to be, you know, be an individual notice system. Now it's all streamlined through the Mechanical Licensing Collective. And so even if you're registered with ASCAP or BMI, you definitely want to still register with the Mechanical Licensing Collective because they represent a different set of rights.
I do have a question about the MLC. if you're an indie artist and you sign up with a distributor like CD Baby or whatever, TuneCore or DistroKid, are they signing up for MLC, or can you actually sign up and collect on your own, or are they collecting for you the mechanical royalties?
Well, so that I'd have to. So, as a publisher, okay, if you're talking about like a sound recording aggregator, that's a different set of rights than on the publishing
mechanical
side.
is for publishing. Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha,
So like publishing side is like public performance and mechanical. Yeah. So you would still want to like whoever owns like the rights to the underlying compositions would still want to register.
So you can collect, like, let's say I wrote a song just as an independent artist. I wrote it and I sang it and I just uploaded it on DistroKid, right? And I don't have a publishing company. Did you write the
song too?
Yeah, let's say I did that. So then I could register on MLC and potentially collect without having to go through a publisher. Because before, I feel like you had to sign up for a publisher to help you collect.
Yeah, so you don't have to do that with the MLC. I mean, they have a great like Q&A on their website, so I don't want to speak out of turn. But my understanding is, so if you do have a publisher, you would want your publisher to register with the MLC because that's the order in which the money would flow, like through the publisher into you. It's not like a public performance right at ASCAP or BMI where they separately pay out like a writer's share and a publisher's share. Like the whole amount for mechanicals is together for writers and publishers through the MLC. And so like if you have a publisher, they would register with the MLC. If you're like independently published and you're not represented by a publishing entity, then you would go ahead and register as an individual with the MLC.
So if you're on like, I'm just going to use my example. Like when I first joined ASCAP, I don't even know if this is right anymore, but at the time they told us, okay, sign up also as a publisher. So I have 2 accounts, right? And then so I can collect my publishing. But I'm not really signed up with a publisher, it's just me as a publisher. Would I register under the publisher name? Or as you said, if they're not split, I could just register as me. I don't need to split them.
Yeah, you don't. I mean, so I don't know what entity, if you actually formed an entity to like
No, there's no
royalties.
LLC. It's just another ASCAP account. I guess.
Right. Okay.
I don't even know if I did that right. That was like 10 years ago.
I mean, if you don't have an actual like legal entity formed, then you should register as an individual.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know. I didn't know that. So
yeah.
So all the independent artists out there, sign up for your mechanical royalties. You might get some unpaid. Get a check for 1 cent in the mail.
Never know. You never know.
A check for a penny.
I used to send those penny checks out when we worked at music reports.
Oh, I know. I've seen a lot of those.
You gotta pay them out. You gotta get the money out the door.
Hey, they add up, you know.
Like a penny with a hole in it.
But this is all really great stuff, and I feel like really...
it's very informative,
Yeah.
and I independent artists should definitely know this information. And let's say for an artist let's just backtrack a little bit. Marketing is very important because what Sarah said was that, you know, now we have an entire pool of artists that can download their music on all these streaming services, and only 80% of it. Now, what percentage? About 20%.
How do you cut through?
You cut through with marketing.
Yeah,
so if you want to be an artist, you really better get serious about your marketing and your promo. Don't be afraid to promote yourself.
Do you think, like from what you guys have seen, do you think that with so much, I guess, noise, literally noise, but do you think that cream still rises to the top, so to speak, or your
music has to be good.
You can cut through, or do you need something else? Like in the past, it was like label money, like that kind of pushes you. But
Payola still pushes people.
But we do see people like so-called viral hits like that come out of nowhere, or whatever, you know. So like, what I mean, I don't know. I guess there's no formula, but from what you've seen...
There's no formula, but you definitely have to have some type of marketing that catches people. You have to do something that's going to go viral, and you have to, as a person, you cannot care.
Yeah.
You really cannot care about, you know, your feelings, or you have to do what you need to do. And I think that's what separates the greats from the have-nots.
True. And I guess the viral ones, if they're not really great, it's just a moment and it dissipates, right? They can't sustain. So
can't sustain. So I would say promotion.
I don't feel I'm qualified to weigh in on this. I'm the lawyer here.
Yeah.
Although I would say that, someone just as a layperson speaking on this, because this is not my area, but, you would think that like someone who has just like raw talent, they're an excellent singer, pianist, whatever it is, like they're not going to just naturally rise to the top without like a whole act and thing to go with it and a brand and like
branding, a story.
So there's some people who create that on their own organically, and then of course they rise to the top. But like the people who don't have like the brand or like the vibe or the thing, like, and they're just like a piece that plugs in, and like that requires like an A&R person to come and like plug them into a boy band and like shape them into something, like make them something, So I think it depends, like kind of what you are, like,
That's really, I love that perspective, because I feel like a lot of times people just think, oh, if you're just talented, you'll get there. But it just depends. Yeah, because there's so many good, talented people out there. Yeah. And also some of them maybe don't have the drive to, maybe they don't want to be an artist, so it's not just talent, I'm hearing you say. It's everything.
Well, and it's the team that you have around you. I used to work more on the front lines of music before I became a nerd, like, and I just... you see like different levels of professionalism like around people's like support teams and their management. And
what's something to look for if you're looking for, like, since you've seen so many, like what is a sign of a successful team if you're an artist and you're looking to put together a management team or something like that?
Well, I mean, again, I don't know if that's necessarily my area, but I will say that like I think a lot of people start off with like friends or family as like their management, like when they're in the early stages of their career. And then once they like hit a certain level, they need another kind of like level of professional support. And a lot of them have a hard time, I think, having that conversation with their like prior managers and letting them go because of they're good friends with them or it's family or something. But if you're not willing to do that, I've seen people like keep like those like early stage managers that are like their friends and family on far too long. And like you just don't have like the sense of like a professional team when people are reaching out to them, like the level of communication and responsiveness and know-how in the business. And that turns people away from working with them.
Yeah. So you definitely need to know when it's time to
like scale up.
To scale up. And scaling
do it with grace without...
Do it gracefully, though.
Do it nicely, but be honest. Yeah.
You might have to burn some bridges, but
yeah. Or which this also goes back to contracts. So maybe artists should focus more on short-term contracts with management, so it's not so much of a blow.
What about like Meg Thee Stallion? Didn't that happen with her?
Sort of like her. She started out, I guess, with Carl Crawford and. Whoever his team was, and then she became huge, and then next thing you know, she's with Def Jam now, I believe,
or Jay-Z's, yeah.
So that would be the next level, right? And I don't know what the business dealings was, but that is definitely an example of a transition. Could it have happened smoother if there was proper contracts in the beginning? I think so. But then you have to also think about the business that you're in and the genre. This is hip hop. So, you dealing with hood people. It's different. You can't, it's hard to have a professional conversation with someone who is, this is why I don't like hip hop like that. It's like, I like to live.
Well, I guess
there's just so much drama, but it goes back to contracts. So I think it should be short term. Maybe like 2 years for management. If it works, then you extend it another 2 years. And if they blow up, I think it would be easier like that. What do you think?
I think that's good for the artist, but I think that from what I've seen, like in this case, I don't know the details, but it sounds like I think he wanted a piece of the bigger pie, right?
Of the bigger pie, and because he made her.
Yeah, because they'll think like, well, it's not fair.
Says.
Yeah, they'll think like nobody ever makes someone.
No one makes someone.
They're gonna get there anyway with or without, but. Yeah, so what is fair, I guess, if like someone is in the early stages, like they did play a part in helping them up, but do you think they should keep getting a piece of the pie later if they're not involved anymore? It doesn't seem fair to me. It seems like they should just accept that they were part of the journey,
But I think there's a contractual solution to that. It's called a sunset clause in a management contract, and so
dropping gems. Sunset. There we go.
I mean, so like the deal is like, nobody knows the exact equation, right? But like you have to have like enough benefit to the manager to incentivize them to perform their best and like use their contacts and their introductions to do, or whatever it is they're doing for the artist. and do it full-heartedly, knowing that like the artist can't just, if they blow up based on the manager's work, turn around and say you're fired, you're too expensive, or I don't want to do this, but they're, have like certain situations set up from that manager helping them out. And so like the sunset clause basically says that like that manager, even after their agreement with the artist ends for a period of time, whether it's a year, 2 years, 5 years, it's usually probably like as long as I've seen, I guess, but they get like a certain percentage of like the income, it won't be like exactly the percentage they were earning when they were actively managing them, but and usually it's called sunset because as the sun goes down, it's kind of like the percentage goes down like over time. So I think, but like striking that balance is difficult, right? Like you have to look at the stature of the artist, the stature of the manager. Sometimes you have a new manager taking on a big artist. Sometimes you have a really experienced manager taking on a new band, like, and like what everyone brings to the table is going to, dictate like kind of like how those like, and also like what their services are providing. I think the one thing you want to be really careful of as an artist and making sure that like the type of support that manager is giving you aligns with the categories of income that, they're trying to tax you on. Because if they're not, and like in tangential ones, like sure, if they promote some big show, like they should get a part of like merchandising and sales related to that show, but if you're pursuing some completely different type of career, something that they're not supporting you with, you want to just make sure you're like kind of keeping them in the world in which they're actually having like an impact on your career and not let them touch everything in your life or whatever, so there's always that, like the fight over the scope of like what you get to tax as a manager and then how long you get to like get a piece of the pie afterwards.
I love that sunset clause. It makes it sound so elegant.
Yes, because I really hate to see like Meg going through that by herself so publicly.
Yeah. So you just got to write it in from the get-go, it sounds like, right? Sarah had to
guys, Sarah is a very
busy lady. She's a busy attorney. Yeah, so we didn't get a chance to say goodbye, but we pretty much, we've gotten a lot of gems.
Yeah, we've gotten a lot of really good information that we hope, if you're an aspiring artist or if you're already an established artist, to give you these tools that we have that can, help you along your journey. So the last thing we were talking about, sunset clause. The sunset clause.
Write one of those into that's I didn't know about that. So that's good to know.
So, if you see, the good thing about seeing what's happening with the artists now in the limelight is that you get to learn and take notes. If you're the next Meg, if you're going to be the next Kaylee's, the next Beyonce, if that's you.
Yeah.
Just make sure your contracts are in order.
It's win-win, right? Sunset clause kind of should be written in a way so the person, like the manager, if you get a new manager and they're not doing any work for you anymore, it kind of tapers off, but they're still getting money and not. So it should be like, okay, it's a win-win. Like,
it should be a win-win.
You should address it. Yeah, if you don't address it, you get into conflicts down the road.
Yeah, and that's the best you can do. Have a contract, so at least, when you get in front of a judge, it can be dealt with accordingly. And more importantly, I really hope that you're dealing with people that are actually good people or dealing with managers that have actual sense, because I know for a fact that, we all love music. Music brings the world together, and the artists that are in this and putting out their talent and their gifts really should not have to feel like their lives are in danger because, a certain person, doesn't like how you're now moving. You have all the success in the industry, and basically your life you should never feel like you're in danger.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah, I mean, with social media, people know where your whereabouts are and things like that. So you just got to be more careful. Yeah.
In regards to PNB Rock, that was tragic. And that's just, it's unfortunate. And I send my condolences to his family, but it's just another thing that we need to address, especially in the hip hop culture, that we really have to stop killing each other. And really, music for me, it's like, it's a way to express yourself, but it's also a fantasy world, you know? It's like you get to do things that aren't necessarily what's going to happen in real life. And people see that and they're like, oh, he's living this life or it's lavish. And I'm like, no, like, we're just creating art.
Yeah,
it's art.
We're artists.
We're artists. Don't be jealous about what we put out, you know, or jealous about, you know, what, you know, we were able to attain because of that. It's just unfortunate.
I think, unfortunately, I feel like that it's hard. I don't know why that stuff happens, but it feels like a lot of people who are stuck in like a low vibration of, you know, or jealousy, like you said, or something. I don't know, but I don't know.
Because we're all in this together. Yeah. Everybody's going through something, literally. Yeah. Whether you think it's all, you know, the grass is green, you never know what someone is really going through. So I would just really like to see more of the music industry become more of a safe space for artists. Like we still should be able to feel like we can go out anywhere and, you know, do the things that we love without having to freaking die over it. And it's unfortunate, and that's something that really does have to stop, specifically in the hip hop.
It's almost like
culture.
People don't want you. It's like the crabs in a barrel analogy, where like, oh, now they're successful. I don't like that. So, I mean, I don't know if that was the motive, but I feel like that seems to be a pattern of like people who make it now become targets. Yeah. Just because people aren't happy with them.
But it's specifically in the urban genre. It's like specific, like you don't hear about this happening in country. For damn sure don't hear it happening in pop culture. Like you don't. Like like why is it happening? Why is it still happening?
How do you think we can remedy? Like what is...
Unfortunately, I feel like I don't have the answer. But I think it goes back to empathy and just having respect for human life and humanity and dignity. It doesn't matter what genre, it's just who you are as a person. I mean, I don't have the answer, but I just know killing each other is not it at all.
I think maybe as like giving back to the community. I mean, I feel like a lot of times it's just, like you said, empathy. Like if people can be empathetic towards others and like on both ends, I guess, and then like
it's a complex issue. Yeah. It has to do with economics, you know, the haves and have-nots, jealousy.
Yeah. Well, we're working on it. We're getting there.
Condolences. I don't even know what to say. I don't have the words, but I just know we just have to stop killing each other. And I don't know how to close it.
Well, let's end on a good note.
On a brighter note. Anything good happened?
We didn't get a chance to talk about this, but this isn't a good, but this is a silver lining. I guess the metaverse rapper FN Mecca was signed and then dropped. So the good thing is that he was dropped, not that he was signed.
Okay, I'm like, wait, where's this going?
The fact that a major label, Capitol Records, well, first of all, I don't know why they even thought to sign him in the first place, but if you hadn't heard about this AI rapper, and apparently the voice behind it did not get paid, which is another problem. But at least, I would say the silver lining is there's more attention on the rapper now, so hopefully he gets his flowers as a real rapper and not having to go through this weird racist situation.
And we really need to move into an industry where everyone gets fair and equitable pay. Songwriters, artists, like everybody needs to win.
Yep. Yeah. Well, we have faith.
And we're going to wrap up episode 5 of the Queendustry with that. And we'll be back next week we'll find something.
To be continued.
We'll find
Thanks for joining us on the
Queendustry.